probably. Let's move on to the Statue of Peace at on South Front Street.
Sorry, this is Abby. I'm not sure. Who should I be unmuting for this?
Question. I don't know. It says it's the Office of Arts Culture. Is Margot here?
Margot?
Okay, I've unmuted Margot.
I'm here. Hello, can you hear me?
We hear you, Margot.
I'm here, but this presentation is actually for Shinju. You should unmute Shinju and Dave Q. I think they were in the email. They will make the presentation to you.
Hi, this is Shinju Cho.
Morning, Shinju.
Good morning. I would add that the third person joining us in the presentation as a panelist is Julie Snell from TEND. If you could unmute her, please.
Good morning, Julie.
Before you get started,
Good morning, Jose.
A question for you, just to be clear. This is a project that is endorsed by the Office of Arts, Culture, and Creative Economy, yes?
That is correct.
Okay, just wanted to make that clear.
Yep.
Dave and Julie, are you here with me?
Yes, we're here.
Yes, I'm here.
Wonderful. Good, almost afternoon. Thank you so much for hearing us. We are here on behalf of the Committee of Statue of Peace from Korean American Association of Greater Philadelphia. And we are seeking approval of the public art donation of Statue of Peace. And here with me are Dave Q, our public art consultant, and Julie Snell from TEND Landscaping, Architecture Landscaping. So going to the slide, next slide, please. And to the next slide. So to briefly touch on the history of comfort women, the term refers to a system of sexual slavery of upwards 200,000 girls and women from countries in Asia and Oceania occupied by Japan during the 30s and 40s. This is one of the unresolved history and contentious history from during the World War II. This compelled many people, and particularly artists in Korea, who actually comprises 80% of the girls and women who were kidnapped and abducted and forced into sexual slavery. This sculpture in particular was created by Seokyeong and Eun-sung Kim. It's a wife and husband duo. It was made in 2011 and installed across the street from the Japanese embassy in Seoul, Korea. Since then, it has become synonymous with the justice and reconciliation movement for the perished and surviving comfort women. In Korea, this movement is headed by Korean Council, which is a short name for a very long title. And through our partnership with them, we're connected to the global network of statues of peace worldwide. The impetus was to give this contentious history a spokesperson on behalf of silenced and perished voices, and reflecting that globally, national leaders and soldiers loom very large in telling of wars and victories, and therefore dominate the monuments. The people for whom the war was fought and have to bear the consequences of wars that are equally, if not more, lasting and telling vessels of the aftermath. And I will note that this is a global movement. There are numerous replicas of various sizes of the statue in Korea. There's 6 in the US, and there's 6 more worldwide. It is an art enabling action beyond just memorial to join and further the progress on peace and gender and race inequality for us in Philadelphia and beyond. And our aim is to establish an advisory board that represents a broad spectrum of these issues. and lead to robust programming in the future. And we certainly hope that the statute compels more unpacking of the complex geopolitical ramifications of the World War II in the Asia Pacific and help us reflect on our current challenges as a nation and the world. The statute aims to promote peace, reconciliation between societies, and progress worldwide. And we are very hopeful and eager for the programmatic excellence that it will bring by us connecting to the many people and leaders and organizations who are fighting this fight on the justice of these issues on many fronts. Now for Philadelphia, this is significant for many reasons. Not only are we joining the global network, but what we're proposing here is a renovated space, a very humble park that will house not only the statue, but that will reflect the peaceful and contemplative nature of what this statue brings. And having a park and the statue built together will be the first in the world. Not even in Korea, where they have museums and residences for the surviving comfort women, have this yet. And in the US, we will be the first American city to have it on the public grounds. You'll note that from the information that we have provided the commission, that all the other statues established in the US are on private or private grounds. And not to mention that this will be contributing to solving the deficit of female figures and monuments in our public art landscape. Moving to slide 3. We'd like to provide a brief history of how this came to be in Philadelphia. The fundraising efforts began within Korean community in the region, led by the Korean American Association of Greater Philadelphia. As you can see, there's a great deal of a gap between 2012 and 2017. The location and how to go about this was quite a conundrum, especially as we have not built up a professionally powered network. In 2017, we have determined that we're going to really fulfill the mission of the statue by putting it within the city and go through the administrative process. And we are aided by council members Helen Kim. And of course, with blessing of council member Squilla as well, we have surveyed multiple sites with the assistance of Interstate Land Management Corporation, and have chosen 800 South Front Street, which is currently a very small, humble parklet size. You'll see the images very soon. And have since, promptly after, met with the Quinn Village Neighborhood Association and presented our proposal and began a very extensive 2-year outreach. I would say it's actually going on to 3 years now. We invested quite heavily by meeting them at organizational and neighborhood level. And by now have gathered and garnered a lot of support and awareness of what we are trying to do. And in 2019, we have submitted the donation proposal to the Office of Public Art, and soon learned that the parcel belongs to the Parks and Recreation. And we have then recruited Tend to create an in-depth design concept and that proposal. And in 2020, we have received renewed support and approvals from Quinn Village Neighborhood Association and ILMAC, who have come on board with our concept design. And of course, we have met with Park and Recreation twice, received their approval. And just in December, we have received the approval from the Public Art Advisory Committee. If there are no other questions, I'll hand this over to Dave Q to talk about the site and the sculpture herself.
Sure, thanks Shinju. This is Dave Q. Thank you to the commissioners for the opportunity to present the project. Can we go to the next slide? So I'll share a few details about the sculpture itself and just a little bit about, the meaning of this site, 800 South Front Street. And then I'll hand it over to my colleague, Julie Snell, to talk about the site design itself. So as Shinju mentioned, the sculpture was first created by Korean artists So-kyung and Unsung Kim in 2011. And since then, it has grown into a global movement. So what we're looking at this image on the right, this is the statue that's installed in Glendale, California. The statue for Philadelphia is pending approval, certainly from this art commission, but, we'll model it after this version. So the proposed dimensions of the work are about 4.5 feet tall and about 6.5 feet wide and 5.25 feet deep, including the granite base. So it's roughly life size. The girl and the chair are made of bronze and the base is made of granite. And if we look at the next slide, we can see that the shadow is made of black stone. Each of the elements of the sculpture has, much symbolism, but I won't go into that. It's all those details are in the proposal document, and certainly we're welcome to ask questions about each of those. But that's the sculpture itself that we're looking at. Next slide. So the site itself, it is owned by Philadelphia Parks and Rec. It is within the boundaries of Queen Village Neighborhood Association. So we've been doing a lot of outreach on the ground with our immediate neighbors and with QVNA. And then because it is along the I-95 corridor, next slide, that means it is actually managed and maintained by the Interstate Land Management Corporation. So that's the parcel there. It's at the intersection of Front and Queen Street. And it is right up against the I-95 corridor. Next slide. This is a street level view looking into the existing park. Just a small, humble site, but Julie will give us a little more information about, the site analysis and how we've designed this to be a home for the sculpture. Next slide. I do want to talk about one, sticking point for me as a public art consultant. Why are we putting a sculpture with an international context in such a local park? And we really started to like this site when we realized there's about a 10-minute walk from the Philadelphia Waterfront Memorial District, which includes veterans memorials of the Korean, Beirut, Irish, Scottish, and Vietnam Wars. And this is a district that ILMAC works with pretty extensively. We feel that the Statue of Peace fits alongside this context, but remains separate and should be separate because it recognizes the resilience of women, not men, not soldiers, as those other memorials do, in time of conflict. So we appreciate the site's proximity to this district, but also its distance separating it from those being recognized in those other memorials. Okay, next slide. And then I will turn it over to my colleague, Julie Snell of Tend Landscape, to tell us about the site design process.
Thank you, Dave. We can go to the next slide. So of course we began with a site analysis, and the site itself has three basic components. It's the wide sidewalk on Front Street, it is the plaza area itself, and it is the surrounding mature landscape. And of course, the highway 95 is a major factor in the site. But we found at this location, the way that the landscape actually slopes up to meet the sound wall and the structure of the highway, it provides a buffering to the plaza below. And the site does have a residential feel to it, and the mature landscape definitely adds to that. When you're in the space, you do feel like you're part of the neighborhood. There's a lot of dog walkers, runners, bicycles, that sort of thing, and across from the houses. The mature landscape really is the main feature of the site, and I'll just explain what the shading is that we're seeing. So on the two ends, the green part, they're sort of bookends or end caps of the site. In that location, that's the most established, mature, and healthy part of the landscape. We have a canopy layer of sort of mid-sized trees, and we have a shrub layer, and we have a ground layer in that area. that's all pretty well defined. In the center area, the part that's shown in orange, that's pretty far up the slope towards the sound wall itself. The trees in that area are overgrown. There's some invasive woody vines that have moved in. So there's some issues with the landscape in that area. And then the red area that you see, that's indicating an area of disturbance. At some point, some plants were removed from that area, and then in the empty space, invasive weeds came in. So there is sort of even though the site is very symmetrical, there is in the existing landscape an area that kind of stands out as far as it's different than the others and needing a little remediation. The plaza area itself currently has some smaller understory trees, shrubs, and a bench. We found at further investigation, the health of those small trees, they're Acer campestri, they're not in good health at the moment. And then the plaza is about 20 feet deep itself, and the sidewalk is about 10 feet wide. So when you're in that space, it is a very generous feel. There's a lot of room there. Let's see. So we took this information, sort of looking at this space and looking at the opportunities that were here, and we developed several concepts. I believe it was 3 concepts. And what we did, we worked with the Committee for the Statue of Peace and the neighborhood group and PPR, and there was really a robust process there of feedback, of review of our plans, and we were able then to develop one concept, which I believe is the next slide. So we settled on this conceptual plan of the site, and this reflects this process of feedback that we got from the community, that we got from the committee, and that we got from PPR. I will just kind of quickly explain what the numbers are, and then I'll go back in and talk a little bit more. So number 1 just refers to the existing landscape that's there, that we've described. Number 2 is the plaza area. And number 3 are the new planting beds. And number 4 is the sidewalk area that shows new street trees. So I want to focus in on number 2, which is the plaza area. So I've mentioned that it is sort of wide enough. One of the things that we were asked to consider in this process was making a space for the artwork that would be contemplative and be very reflective for one person being in relationship with the sculpture, but also a place that could accommodate a gathering or a ceremony. And so that was one of the driving things in making this plaza area, this sanctuary place. We needed to consider that because we didn't want it to feel too empty when one person was there, and we didn't want it to feel too crowded when many people were there. The concept does show those existing small trees that were in that central area. Those are gone. So we're proposing to take out those 2 areas of trees. It's 4 trees total and 1 shrub bed, and there's a bench there now. So we're removing those. And what you're seeing here is the location of the artwork. And then the number 3 shows beds. And the idea, they are 3 separate beds, but the idea is that they are read together. It's a continuous look. Excuse me. There is a low seat wall bordering the middle bed on the interior side. So a viewer could sit on that seat wall in the space. We also see 2 small pathways that break up the 3 beds. And the intention there is to have a different experience, a smaller intimate experience, so you're closer to the landscape there as you move into this space versus the opening on the 2 ends, which are more sidewalk scale, I would say. The sidewalk itself, because we are proposing to remove the smaller trees of the interior of the plaza, we are showing 2 tree trenches along the sidewalk. Currently, there are no street trees along this part of the block, and there are no wires overhead. So we're proposing some canopy trees at this location. And another item here is lighting. So this plan proposes 2 pedestrian scale lights on the sidewalk side. And then within the sanctuary area itself, there's low lighting that would be installed along the seat wall and along the existing curb of the existing landscape to light the space itself. The next slide. And this gives you a better view of the 3 planting beds and the site itself. I think that might be my last slide, and I'll turn it over to question. Oh, I'm sorry. Here's a bit of the detail. So on the top row, we're looking at some materials. And the materials in the planting, the idea is that these are supporting elements that are there to function well and almost be invisible and support the subject of the site, but also add to it. For instance, the planting, although simple, we would want to make sure that it's ecologically diverse and appropriate to the space and provide seasonal interest. So there's a moment of interest throughout the seasons, whether it's spring, summer, fall, winter, there's interest there. So it's not a one-note planting, and it would have to be very carefully considered because the idea is a simplistic overall look that supports the main intention of the space.
Could you go 1 slide back, Julie, and leave that slide up, I think, for us to have a conversation?
Sure.
Thank you. Commissioners, questions, comments?
Julie, I'm sorry, I may have missed this. The orange box in the middle is irrigation controlled? Or?
No, I forgot to mention.
Okay.
There will be a plaque or 2 that explains the story of the artwork. And so this orange space shows a possible location for that plaque.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you. And there's irrigation plan for this?
There is, well, we're just in the concept level here. So I don't know the answer to that 100%, but I would say that the idea is that the landscape has a minimal maintenance requirement. And so we would want to propose things that once established could handle a drier condition or the conditions of the site. So I believe no is the answer.
Yeah, no, it seems to be that way with your plant choices. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Other comments, commissioners?
First of all, I think it's a beautiful, I love the foliage and the way you've replanted this area. I do think it's awfully formal, and that might be what you were going for, but I don't believe that there's something makes me feel uncomfortable about the scale of the sculpture and the space it occupies. Can't put my finger on it right away, but I see it.
Well, if I could build on that, because I feel the same way. Well, first of all, I should say, I know that this has been a very long process for all of you. And, you know, probably during the process of it raised lots of questions about why here, but I think you've done all your homework. I'm totally good with why here. I'm great. It's great that you've engaged the neighborhoods and ILMAC and all those folks. But like Robert, I feel that there is a scale to the setting that the artwork is intended to command. And in fact, the beauty of the artwork is its intimacy. And I do worry that you've bit off more than you need to make this work well. The removal from the sidewalk, the holding down this, what you said, Julie, originally was a very big space, and you're right, it is a big space. And I wonder whether, I don't know whether that was your intentions, which Robert, you were questioning as well, or whether you were sort of maneuvered into a bigger area than you possibly ought to be to suit the needs of the piece itself. And like if you had come along and said, you've created this, you know, quarter of this area, and you've created this lovely little green niche right off of the sidewalk, and you placed it there so it was something you discovered as you were walking up and down the street, I would have said, great, I'm good, I'm terrific with that. That'll be lovely. And I think serve the meaning of the piece extremely well. I don't know, Robert, does that start to address?
I mean, I thought, first of all, I think there's nothing wrong with an open plaza. That sort of commands a certain, just because it exists, it's a certain kind of respect we have for where we are in the world. And that sculpture is so intimate and is so meaningful. I would think it would live better tucked in on top of that knee wall in the foliage.
Interesting you say that, because I was going to the same place. You mean right there?
Yeah.
So it's funny that you mentioned that as that was one of the design options that were given. So it did not escape Julie's attention. Before I let Julie actually answer in detail, I would add that part of the functionality that we had in mind was for this to be programmatically robust, and therefore allowing for small assembly. So that was part of the factor that we have in here. And as for the rest of the design elements, I'll let Julie speak for us.
Right. So we did think of various locations for the artwork itself, and kind of at the beginning, we thought, and we also looked at other nearby memorials and how they were situated. There is, for instance, a VFW memorial just south of here, and that has a very similar presentation to what you were just describing. It's just off the sidewalk, nestled into the landscape. And you sort of do discover it. You don't see it from a distance. And so that context exists, and it's very nearby. We also did consider tucking the artwork back further into the existing landscape, maybe carving out a space, behind the curb wall that you see in the distance there on the edge of the plot. Yes, thank you. We did consider that as well. And so those were various options. Something that was sort of not a pro, but a con of having the sculpture closer to the sidewalk was sort of this idea of it in relationship to the residential area and directly in relationship to the houses across the street. And so that was something to think about, if you do put it closer to the sidewalk, what sort of encounter are you setting up? And so that brought us to putting it back into the plaza a little bit more.
Is that Julie, can I ask you something? Is that a comment you heard, or is that something you were thinking could be a problem?
It came through discussions with the committee, with the Statue of the Peace committee.
But I'm talking about, is it a comment you heard from the neighbors?
Dave, do you know if there was any feedback like that?
I can speak to that.
Oh, thank you.
I don't recall this being a direct comment or feedback from the neighbors. We did door-to-door outreach to the residents on the other side of the street. And this does not come up. However, I believe in our discussion with QVNA at the organizational level, what the neighbors across the street will be seeing every day was something that we want to keep in mind, for that to be striking the balance between peaceful and conspicuous. So the answer is, again, no, that it was not a direct opposition or a concern, but we're mindful of the gaze that she would be casting for the people who are going to see this day in and out.
I have a comment, Alan.
Yeah, Carmen.
I mean, I hear what you're saying, and you know, I think I understand it, but I also think that the message and the incredible history that this piece has, to me, you know, responds better to, I think, what was being mentioned before, to, you know, to it being in a place that allows for contemplation, but also more interaction, because part of the power of, you know, of this piece is the, you know, whether it was originally intentional or not, but it's because of its global meaning and connection is for that interaction to be able to happen. And I think the fact that it's kind of in the middle of that space, you know, responds to that sense and to that meaning.
Well, let me just challenge a bit on that, Carmen, because I think it's a really good point. And the question I would raise is, if I were walking down this sidewalk and I saw this relatively small piece tucked back in a place that one wouldn't naturally walk through, would I tend to just walk by and not engage with it, other than if somebody said, well, there's an event or there's a little, you know, annual memorial? Those are my concerns. I think your point about the engagement is exactly right. And I want to feel confident that the placement of this piece encourages that and doesn't discourage it.
Right. The question that I was going to have at the beginning was whether, you know, what the legend and where they were going to place that, because that may be, you know, solved with, you know, a visible, you know, message and legend that points to, you know, to the piece.
Well, let me suggest this. I don't want to cut the conversation off because it's an important one, but I also want to be respectful of time, and we do have one more presentation to get through. I'm certainly, I think, hearing from commissioners that there's probably pretty solid support for having this thing move forward. What I would like to suggest to the team is to come back with a little more exploration of how to, and maybe, you know, maybe I just would like you to think about it again, about is this location and is this way to set it in the location going to afford you the best opportunities for engagement, which is what Carmen was talking about, for intimacy of the experience, and for the accessibility of it. And I appreciate that you might feel that we're saying many different things at once, and we might be. And it sounds like you've explored them, but I'd like to see a little bit more, for myself, I'd like to see a little bit more exploration of how to, in a way, make it more available and more intimate at the same time.
Could
Go ahead.
I just add to that? I also want to point out that sometimes, I mean, putting it in the middle of that open space sort of, in my mind, is making it much smaller and maybe degrading that space. I think if it were out on that edge, it would start to become much larger, and also that open plaza would enhance its meaning and its size. I think sometimes we just fill a space up and we forget that sometimes the open space is the power. And that's, I think, I would like to see it closer to the sidewalk.
One other quick question for the team. Is being on the back side of it as meaningful as being on the front side of it?
This is Dave. Could you clarify that question? I'm not sure I understand.
Well, I just mean that, you know, the piece has an obvious front, right? But is the power of the piece don't know whether it's equally good, but is being on the back side of the piece, I guess I would say, equally good or important?
Yes.
Like you wouldn't back this piece up into something where you couldn't get to the back of it. Is that true?
Yes, yeah. I would.
Oh,
Sorry, go ahead, Dave.
Yes, because there are elements of the shadow, right, that encourages you to kind of walk around it and interact with it. And we talked about definitely wanting to place it on a low base to encourage that interaction. I appreciate this conversation entirely, and I want to point out maybe two things that I don't think we've brought up. One is, the design of the site as it currently stands is actually meant to encourage, we noticed that this is a local park and there are a lot of joggers and dog walkers that kind of have a path through the park. So that's why there's a little pathway behind to continue to encourage that type of use. And actually, I think, Jose, you asked if this orange box up front, if that was meant for irrigation. That's actually the plaque of the sculpture. Yeah. So that's where, in light of, saving the sculpture itself for a more intimate space where you might have a relationship with it, we put, and instead of being more confrontational, we put the plaque on the sidewalk. So hopefully, that's the thing that you're confronted with. That's the thing, if your interest is piqued, you'll be able to read that plaque and enter the space.
I think that's good. If I can make a quick comment here, I think that the sketches are not doing justice to the scale of the space. I think that there's something odd about the human figures and the scale of the piece. I think that if you look at the drawing on the left side in the middle, is a much more intimate view of what you see here. And perhaps what is throwing off our perception of this is that the planting bed in the front is so broad and wide. Maybe it is the angle of the view. I also think that perhaps a couple of small canopy trees on either side of that planting bed will begin to reduce the perceived scale of the plaza and be able to actually focus the views from the street into the sculpture. I think the bones are there. I think it needs a little bit of tweaking, and I think it's going to be very nice.
Thank
you. Just to quickly clarify about the trees, Jose, there are two understory trees, multi-stem, maybe magnolia or something like that, on either in the new planting beds, and then the canopy trees are on the sidewalk edge. So
I understand. It's just I think that another two trees on either side of the central planting bed that will frame this view that we see right now,
right,
and on either side of the plaque, basically that gives it a little bit of scale. Perhaps they are set back at a different.
Oh, I see what you mean. Distance. Okay.
Because I think that the space, the paved space escapes, all the way down to the cars. If you don't, it's just the perception is too big, and the sculpture is petite, right?
Smaller,
it's only 4.5 feet high. Maybe a way to increase the presence of it is to elevate it a little bit, but that is altering the art itself. And perhaps, there could be some a paving pattern that actually focuses, the space on the piece, on the sculpture. Right now, it's just a grid there of concrete, but I think it's just some refinements and tweakings, and it will be okay. I think the pathways that you would have on either side would probably want to be every bit of 3.5 feet or 4 feet wide, because you want to have a wheelchair go through, if nothing else. So that would reduce a little bit, we'll right size things here a little bit more.
Those are good points. I think it's all coming to the same thing of creating something that Robert said earlier, which is the openness of it, I think, is making it feel this piece less important. And it's not big enough to dominate that space. So I think there is some tweaking to do. And if I do want to get on to this last one. So I think you've heard comments. Love to see this again and see that kind of refinement brought to it. Commissioner, okay with that? could I ask for a motion for, I'm not seeing anything in the chat, so could I ask for a motion for concept approval?
So moved.
Okay, Carmen, thank you. Second. I can't see everybody, so somebody needs to say something.
I second it.
Thank you, Robert. Okay, Paige, go ahead.
Commissioner Jose?
I approve. Thank you.
Commissioner Carmen?
Approve.
Commissioner Steve?
I approve.
Commissioner Raid?
Approved.
Commissioner Robert?
Approve.
Commissioner Mario?
Mario had to leave, but we still have a quorum, so keep going.
Commissioner Allen?
Approve. Okay, well, thank you all, David, Julie, Shinju. We look forward to seeing this again. And congratulations on bringing it this far. It's great.
It's great. Thank you.
Thank you so much.